All right, so I'd like to welcome you all to the Technology Leaders panel. We want to talk about a word which I've been hearing over the last 1.5 days continuously, the word platform. We want to see what the platform can bring us, but we will also discuss a little bit what kind of pitfalls the platform might bring to us. Now, to be able to shed light on this big but very fascinating topic, we have a panel of distinguished leaders, and we all have seen Tony, so we already know Tony. He has been introduced, but I would like to ask our two other panel members to introduce themselves. Why don't you start off, Mike?
My name is Michael Cover. I'm the Director of Technology and Operations at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. I've been in my role now for about 6 years. From a GRC perspective, we've implemented 8 modules from MetricStream, supporting roughly 2,000 end users, at least on an annual basis, as well as the entire enterprise for at least one function within the system for privacy and incident reporting.
Thank you. Sanjay?
Yeah, I'm Sanjay Sinha. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of MetricStream. And my entire career has been spent in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, working with companies like Intel, Sun Microsystems, and Oracle Corporation. In fact, Tony and I shared time together at Sun Microsystems. And I see MetricStream providing a huge opportunity for you all to really automate your processes. So we'll talk more about that.
So as we can see, I think this will be a very lively panel because we will be able to look at the platform topic from 3 very distinct points of view. Oversight and direction, represented by Tony, GRC practice, represented by Mike, and platform provider, represented by Sanjay. So I'm looking forward to a hopefully also a little bit controversial conversation which brings things out for our audience. Now, to get things kicked off, I'd like to mention that in a recent research study, McKinsey stated that every organization today needs to be run like a technology organization with a platform strategy for enterprise solution deployment. Now, that's quite a provocative statement, and to be able to explore that a little bit more, I'd like to jump in with the very first question to help us kind of structure that field of discussion we are going to have. And would like to ask the panel, what does the term platform actually mean for you in the light of your career or maybe personal involvements? Maybe, Tony, would you kick that one off?
Sure. First of all, I want to say thanks for having me here, but also don't interpret anything I said in my speech as being anti-technology or anti-AI or machine learning. I'm actually a big fan of it. I just think we need to be conscious of when it's really, really good, it's great, and sometimes it's not, and we just have to be prepared for those not moments.
So you wouldn't go for the vintage car, would you?
No.
Okay.
So answer the question. To me, platforms are capabilities that allow you to do a variety of things over time, knowing that business is agile and moves quickly. And so I'm a big fan of capabilities where you can change the rules or change the game as business changes without having to go in and rewrite software and do the hard coding that sometimes exists. And I'll just give you one example out of my own history. When I worked at General Motors, we invented this new platform called OnStar. And the original business idea of OnStar was that we were going to resell cellular minutes. At the time, cell phones were just coming into being, and there was a lucrative business case to be made for selling and reselling cellular minutes. And safety and security was kind of a thing we were selling, but the underlying business case was actually reselling cellular minutes. But what we discovered in OnStar, which is a telematics platform, was the ability to provide all kinds of different services to our General Motors customers. And within a year or two of OnStar really being introduced, cellular minute costs went like that and blew up the business case that we originally put together. But we had this great platform that then allowed us to do all kinds of other things, and the value to General Motors and to the customer was brought on by the broader thinking of the people who were actually doing the design of OnStar. And so that to me is an example of a platform that was designed or had one idea in mind, but the business changed and we were actually able to adapt it to a completely different purpose. And it worked out pretty well. And all of your operating systems, ERP systems, and so on are other examples of, I think, great platform plays.
That's a great point, because at the end of the day, from a platform perspective, we're really focused on nimbleness of the platform. It's really, we're looking at things that where we can configure versus customize. Any kind of hard coding, stay away. If you can come into a situation where we have multiple use cases, maybe multiple applications, but we can integrate when it makes sense, to your point earlier this morning, that is really what we call the end game. It is that dynamic tipping point where I can pull in data from different applications to be able to service that end business need. Common database structure, great, that's awesome if you can get there, but it's not always the case, especially when you're looking at that use case by use case methodology. But as long as you're able to answer those simple questions to be able to get to that point of configuration versus customization, you're setting yourself up for a better end.
Absolutely. So you've heard some of the attributes of a platform: nimble, agile, flexible. I think the question really from a provider perspective is, what is it in the platform which drives users to use? So it is about content, it is about applications, and there is a network effect, a virtuous cycle, with the platform, with the attributes we just talked about. You have enough applications, enough content that drives users. The more users there are many different use cases. So you build an ecosystem of solutions, applications, and partners, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. So it's applications, content, APIs, interfaces for extensibility, more users, and ecosystem. An ecosystem, an example is right next door, the Innovation Hub, where you'll see very innovative solutions from partners on top of the MetricStream platform.
Now we have been hearing a lot about value, and if you read the McKinsey report, it talks a lot about APIs, it talks about common databases, it even mentions the types of programming languages and things like that. Now, if I would say, let's talk a little bit more about that, I think most of you in the audience would probably go and grab a coffee. So what I would like to do is actually hone in a little bit more on the question of, during your careers, and are grappling sometimes with the technology and try to drive the platform forward as a technology concept. But what is the best way to explain the value of the platform to the business?
Transparency and collaboration, first and foremost. What we find, past life, current life, everything else, when it comes down to program, or it comes down to an architecture, or if it's an ERP system, if it's a GRC system, if it's an integrated risk management system, whatever you want to call it, whatever acronym you want to go with, it's collaboration, it's transparency, and that scares people. That is the biggest thing that we run into in any of those environments, is that fact that transparency in areas where potentially they've been doing spreadsheets or SharePoint sites, or it's John and Jane's brain that have all the information, and they've been running that process consistently for years and years and years and years. And you come to them with an application and a system, and you go, okay, I've got this workflow automated reporting tool. Maybe there's some RPA or robotic process automation, sorry for the acronyms, They've got the RPA in there. You might have some AI in there as well. But it really comes down to when they start putting their information, their data in there, they're providing transparency to other business areas where they might not have the opportunity to control every single piece of the message. And that's terrifying to folks. So you have to get over that hump with them when you're talking to them about the platforms. You have to be able to give them something on the back end. It's the what's in it for them. It's the value gain. If you can address that point and figure out what lever to pull for each one of those areas that you could be butting your head up against a wall with, that to me is something where it's nirvana. Because if you get all the areas on the same platform, that might not be the same application, it might be multiple applications, whatever it is, but you have them putting their information in a place where it's easily consolidated and reportable. You have that transparency, which is going to drive that collaboration, which is going to involve, if you're talking from a GRC space, you're talking about control automation, control touch points within the business, that constant feel of being audited, which I think we can all understand and represent well with. You have an ability to streamline your processes, your information, your data, and your reporting. And the trick really becomes is getting people over that transparency hump and understanding what lever you want to pull for them to get them excited about the platform. And if you can start with areas that are ready, willing, and able to go and are excited, then you start there, you get more people on the tool, and you hit that tipping point. Those areas that you might have been in a situation where you're beating your head up against a wall with them previously, they're now on board because all these other areas are showing for that success point. So it's hitting that tipping point and knowing when to tap into those areas where that transparency might be a little bit scary to folks.
I think it's all speed is the answer for me, and particularly in the last several jobs I've had. You don't have a common platform, you're just going to be slow. And in today's world, in almost any business I can think of, slow is tantamount to death. It's speed is everything. Even I'd say above agility in some cases. And if you have the platform done right, you'll have speed in your business that you're not likely to be able to get any other way. So if you're looking at risks or looking at things that have gone out of whack or need management attention, the ability to see that sooner rather than later, I think is everything, and worth tons in terms of business advantage.
Yeah, so from a GRC perspective, the question would be, if let's say you were to use the MetricStream GRC platform, one question you want to ask is, which of your manual processes you want to automate? And it's all about speed, it's reuse. So we have pre-built applications, as you know, to automate your audit function, your risk function, compliance, cybersecurity, third-party management. But as you embark on that journey and you're building your own platform, one of the key things I've heard over the last couple of days is within your company, across audit, risk, compliance, and other functions, CISO functions, to have a common language. We talked about data and transparency. So need to be able to create that common taxonomy so that whether it's issues, losses, controls, you have one common taxonomy, and then you can get insight. So you don't have business saying a particular KPI is green and risk is saying it's red. So using the content, common platform, these applications, I think that becomes very critical as you embark on your journey of the whole GRC as a platform.
That's a great point around common taxonomy. In the GRC space, a lot of the folks here, you've heard about, like, in the past, foundational elements and things of that nature. Common risk taxonomy as it relates back to definitions issue management, common definition, what's critical, what's high, what's medium, what's low, and if you go down to insignificant, what does that mean? One thing, if you've never done that, or if you're early on in your journey, get everybody together in your oversight, compliance, and audit areas. Get everybody talking at least in some common terms from control language. Your SOX, your model audit rule, and healthcare model audit rule department, they might have different terminology than your information security department, your compliance areas, your internal audit areas. And just be ready for that conversation to align on definitions to take time. It took us like 8 months to agree on colors. And that is as funny as I'm getting right now. It's early, but it's 8 months to agree on colors. Getting people over the hump and just agreeing like at a critical level issue what is red was difficult for us. You had people where it was purple, maroon, some people it was orange, some people it was yellow, all over the place. But getting everybody to agree on colors takes time, and that alignment takes time. Even when you're going from a platform perspective, understanding that time. But if you don't take that time on the front end, you're going to fail on the back end because it's not going to work for everybody. Or you're going to have to put a whole bunch of different reports on top of reports on top of reports to try to standardize what does the language mean and mix up your perspectives all over the place. Take your time on the front end. It's the best thing that you can do, especially when we're talking about that common taxonomy.
You're from Michigan, so it's either green or blue.
It's green. It's all green here.
But, so, as we know, GRC is a journey. So you get the right definition, the common language. You start with a few applications. You have a best practices blueprint, so you do more configuration, not customization.
Yep.
But you'll find there'll be other use cases. And one of the beauties of platform, going back to the leverage you get, there are common tools, common interfaces. So as you come up with new use cases, MetricStream will provide, Andy has a great R&D department, but I don't think he can build all the apps which you need. So this is where either bespoke application development on the platform using the tools we provide, or partners. So just if you go to the next door here, there's examples of content being integrated, FAIR methodology using Monte Carlo simulation for cyber risk. So all of these new applications, innovations, leveraging the common taxonomy, the common platform, and it seamlessly extends the value you get from the platform. So that's the other aspect, the extensibility in a very integrated way.
Now, I think we have covered to a certain extent the value and the capabilities of the platform when it's there. So I'd like to play devil's advocate a little bit and ask about your experience. If you hear that, you look at a landscape, there might be very different applications, they don't talk to each other, and you come up, and I'm sure that's what you found at the government sides too, is now we're going to put in a common platform. The first thing you hear is, oh, that's going to take forever. It's going to be big, it's an elephant. And then on the other hand, you will be saying, or you will have people say, but we're going to be agile, we're going to be faster, we're going to do incremental updates and all those types of things. How do you get over that hump or over that dichotomy of different perceptions?
Well, I think one of the mistakes, and I've seen a number, is sometimes adopting a platform means, to your point, different things to different people. So one of the organizations I joined decided, for example, when it was ERP time, that they were going to adopt SAP. And you would think, that's all the decision that needed to be made. In that particular case, they did adopt SAP, but they did 12 different implementations of SAP. They had made the same choice in name only, but configured each of those SAP instances a different way. And in that case, they might as well have put in 12 different ERP systems. They got no value out of the exercise that they went through, and ultimately had to tear out 11 of them and take advantage of one. So I think that's a common mistake. The second common mistake I see is when putting in a platform to try to make the new platform behave exactly like the thing it was replacing, which I think defeats the purpose in many cases and doesn't bring the organization together and have the conversation around how should things work in this modern era versus making it look like the old system that we just replaced. Those are two examples of, I think, big mistakes that I see in adopting platforms.
That is spot on, too. I mean, in my past life, in my consulting life, doing enterprise-wide system implementation, some of these things, like the SAP example, it takes time to take those large platform rollouts, to go through them and do them the right way. And you can run into a situation where there's a change in leadership at that same time. And that new leader is going to come in and they could have a completely different feel or want for where they want to go. And we see that all the time. And it's really getting that person up to speed to say, look, we're already here. Maybe we have a couple of use cases, or maybe we're halfway through the implementation of SAP and 6 of the 12 that are going up. It's understanding that it's, on the flip side of that, it's not always bad to restart or reset, but you want to be able to at least obtain some value, get to the point where you want to be from a system implementation, from a platform implementation standpoint, know the value drivers on the front end, and be able to answer the question consistently of what problem are we trying to solve for. That's one of the things that my boss asks me all the time. Every time we go into a new area, every time we're implementing or we're talking about integration from a platform perspective, it's what problem are we trying to solve for? And if we can't answer that effectively and efficiently throughout the phase and life cycle of the project, we're doing something wrong. That question, that answer can change, but you need to be able to have a very clear and concise response. And that response just can't be about what compliance or audit or risk or operations or whoever it could be is really focused on. It's got to be when you're talking about a platform, what is the value driver from a big picture perspective? If you're focused on that one little area or that one little use case, that's how you wind up with 12 SAPs. That's how you wind up with 12 instances of the same tool, just in brand. You want to be able to understand what are those value drivers at the enterprise level.
And I'd also add, it depends on who in the institution is doing the driving. You're not going to believe this, but one example in the SAP case was I worked as a consultant for an organization that let the tax department decide how the SAP system was going to be configured. They were the leading reason why SAP was chosen, because they did a good job of tax, better than some of the other packages. Mm-hmm. And so what got implemented initially was a system that was great for the tax department, but it was a tax on everybody else in the organization, and was a horrible implementation. So don't let the wrong people lead. So one of the tips, we talked about what not to do. Let me mention what to do. One of the best practices I ever saw when implementing a new platform was to take the implementation team and march them around to 6 other customers who've gone and implemented that platform through various stages. Some will have finished their implementation, some are just starting, some are in the middle. And interview those implementation teams about what they've learned, what they did right, what they did wrong, before you implement the first bit of technology. And having done that, you'll have a much better implementation because you can learn from others.
That is significant, and even beyond that, even beyond that, it's as you're implementing pieces, demo, pilot, verify up against your requirements, slam it up against your RTMs, your traceability matrices. Make sure that what's being delivered actually solves for that problem that you were answering on the front end. And if it doesn't, you're going to have that aha moment. And don't be afraid to correct it at that time, dress the configuration, figure out what you need to do, be willing to have that aha moment. But if you just wait until you're implemented all the way on the back end, you're like, man, all my access controls aren't doing what they're supposed to do, or they don't. It's oops. Now we've spent all this time, money, and effort, and essentially we're kicking off in a business area where their initial interaction with the tool is going to be negative. And if that happens, your platform's you're already in an uphill battle at that point.
So from a provider perspective, there are things which just using new software methodologies, agile development, service-oriented architecture, which the providers have done over the last decade or so. And I spent last 10 years at Oracle moving from the on-premise ERP, CRM, supply chain systems, things we just talked about, to a more agile software as a service. So, and I think together, customers and vendors, we realized the pitfalls we just talked about. So right from the design, what we decided was we need to have best practices, an opinionated view of what should be a business process, and have enough knobs to allow customers to configure, but not fall in the pitfall of the on-premise world where I'll give you you can change the schema, you can change everything. And then when you try to upgrade, it becomes a re-implementation. So in software as a service, we have shut down, we don't give you those openings. It's very prescriptive, but it's flexible enough so that you can get within 90 days, conference room pilot 1 with your data, and it's best practices blueprint driven, and often you may have to change your business process. So don't do what you were doing before, because you want to get the quick time to value, be agile. So use case driven and to one at a time. And the advantage here so with Oracle over the last 10 years, these business processes have matured, whether it is the customer experience, sales, marketing, service, ERP, and now supply chain. I see the same evolution happening with GRC. And MetricStream is accelerating the whole GRC software as a service. So again, blueprint driven, so that you don't shoot yourself in the foot. Do configurations, not customization. Very agile, and keep on adding more content, more applications as you go along. So it's the agility. It is not an all-you-can-eat hot dog show, right? So don't try to do everything in one shot. Have a prescriptive journey in place.
Okay, it looks like we're moved straight into the advisory type of a conversation for the audience. Thank you very much for that. I would like to open up the floor now for questions. I think we have a couple of runners with microphones, so please raise your hand. I think worst case, you have to throw something towards me because it's very hard for me to see you. All right. I think we have one over there. Thank you.
Yeah. So this question is to Tony. So considering the advancements in the technology, so how is government coping up to these technology advancements?
Well, it's all over the map. I was telling somebody before the conference this morning that when I got into the role, one of the first things you do is a situational assessment, and you look at what you're dealing with. And right after the OPM breach, this became critically important that we have a real good inventory of what we had. And what I discovered was very interesting. It was kind of like the rings on a tree or carbon dating things. I could look at government institutions and when they first got funding for a program or a project, and it was obvious that whoever was in charge at that point went out and tried to select the best technology they could find at the time, whether it was mainframes or client server or virtualization or various stages of Microsoft technology. They would go out and buy the best technology they could find, most modern technology they could find at the time, and then custom write software on that platform. And their thought process was, I'm using this modern stuff, That'll carry me forward into the future. The mistake that they made was it was all custom software. And they would leave after 3 or 4 years, turn it over to their successor, and some of that technology didn't age well, but it was all custom code. And then you see this layering, one on top of another, of various modern technologies. So if you look at IRS, for example, its core is, kind of 1950, 1960-ish mainframe technology, surrounded by every decade's worth of new technology that was invented somewhere along the way. And real transformation is going to be undoing a lot of those layers and redoing the core platform, from the beginning, really. And it'll cost a lot less and it'll work a lot better, but it's going to be a big effort in that particular case. But Social Security, you name any of the big federal agencies and you see virtually the same picture almost everywhere. So part of the work I'm doing now is working behind the scenes to help continue the momentum we started. And thankfully the Trump team is continuing that work in this particular space. And there's a big emphasis now on modernizing and digitizing government services. So it's really critically important for our nation, for our economy, and for citizen services that we get beyond this sort of legacy of good decisions for the day, but not good architecture for the long term.
Yeah, as a frequent international traveler, I really commend government doing that. So those of you who have used global entry, your passport is scanned, there's no lines, you just go in there, put your fingerprint, and they're off. So that's a very good example from your mobile device with your passport, the first line, being able to do everything in self-service.
And by the way, don't expect that at the San Francisco airport. So we have time for one more question. I see somebody in the middle there.
Hello, I'm David Creston. We're going through a period of significant technology disruption. So I was going to ask you a question about GRC in the world of distributed platform, and even more importantly, maybe, a different type of organization structure, maybe distributed organizations. And how do you maybe see GRC responding to a very different type of organization, a very different type of technology?
So in the GRC space, especially when you're running in that distributed organization standpoint, the first and foremost, and you probably heard some people talk about this yesterday, libraries are critical. You can run the same platform and the same tool set across those numerous organizations. One, if you're licensed for it, of course, but that's another thing. So, and that's joke 2. I promised 3, that's 2. That was 3, that was bad. Okay, so you can do it, but you really got to focus on the libraries first and foremost. And you got to think to yourself, as you're going across, it could be from an organizational standpoint, you might run into a situation where you can't get people to necessarily agree on some of those foundational elements, different enterprises, different types of companies, different things of that nature. Focus on the libraries. Focus on that setup. Stay as out of the box as physically possible. Further,
sorry. I'm not talking about distributed organizations within a traditional organization. I'm talking about completely distributed, disaggregated organizations where, in fact, the existing organization does not exist. We're talking about platforms that may have to cross over companies and different entities, not within an existing entity. How's GRC going to respond to that type of disruption in the future?
Premise still applies. We have some of that. We have a lot of that in healthcare today. And the premise still applies. From a GRC perspective, the ability to make those organizations be able to talk where applicable, if they're related, if they're owned, operated, or purchased, that's a huge piece. Otherwise, it's being able to share information across the board when applicable. You do a lot of that with policy and procedure governance and things of that nature in the GRC space. You know, it's when you're going down that road and you want to be able to understand in that M&A type world, or even just I want to share information with my peer because maybe there was a breach or maybe there was something along that nature, and I want to be able to share whatever that control taxonomy is. High trust is a big example right now. So it's the ability to have that communication and that nimbleness, but the premise still applies. If you can focus, if you're trying to integrate it all across numerous different types of organizations or enterprises, focus on your libraries, build them up. And if you're in a situation where I want to be able to share information, either with peer groups or with other types of enterprises or organizations, just in these types of conversations, I want to be able to share libraries, like high trust or whatever it could be, as another, if you're sticking with high trust. You want to be able to have that library, be able to download that information of controls, be able to share it with somebody, and have another company be able to pick it up. That's a big piece. So as long as you're thinking about it from a GRC, from a technology perspective that way, you have an ability to build it back up from the ground up and stay consistent.
And I'd say with the rise of service platforms everywhere and lots of organizations depending on these common services, you're going to see standards emerge, because contractually you just can't have everything be a unique contract when you're providing a service. Goes back to what you were saying. Here's the areas where you have flexibility. Here's the areas where we're delivering you a service and you can't change it. And as you get dominant players in service areas, I think you'll see some of these standards emerge that provide the common language and the common framework.
Yeah, and we are providing basically APIs and the standard security models so that you can build that relationship in a distributed way. So the platform itself is service-oriented, it's the API economy, and so from an architectural perspective, that's what we are also doing.
All right, before we go into implementing the system, right away here on stage, I think I'd like to close out a little experiment, and that is, it's probably very hard. If you think about a one-sentence piece of advice or caveat that you would like to leave for the audience on the journey on either bringing in a platform or being on the journey of leveraging a platform moving forward, what would be that one sentence that you would like to leave with the audience? Maybe this time we start with Sanjay.
Yeah, so perform with integrity is a key thing. So it's not just what is legal, but also ethical, and that is where using tools, you can automate, you can have the governance in place so that you can provide not just reactive, but proactive help to the business so that they can optimize performance without causing undue risk to the business.
Thank you.
We focus on mantras in our program. And I'm going to give you two. I'm not coining these. I've taken these from other people because they're a lot smarter than me. Do different and do better. Try to get out of the status quo and be willing to push out of the status quo. And ready, willing, and able. Focus on areas that are ready for that change. Maybe they're mature in process. They're willing to receive the change, meaning they're willing to move on to wherever you're going. And they're able to. They've got the time, money, resources to be able to do that. Remember those two things. Integrate them into your program, and you should be successful.
Mine is simple. Don't write any software you don't have to.
That's a fantastic closure. Thank you very much. A big round of applause for our panel, please.